Meanwhile, in the distant Mongolian grasslands, another storm was rising. A storm that would change the world. A boy born under a blood moon, abandoned by his tribe, raised to be tough as steel. By age 20, he was a feared warrior, uniting the Mongol clans. And by age 30, he was proclaimed Genghis Khan, meaning ocean-going conqueror. He wasn't just a brutal warlord. History books often get this wrong. He introduced progressive laws. He banned the kidnapping of women. He opposed slavery. He allowed freedom of religion. He was also an astute military leader and strategist. Under his rule, the Mongols developed the first real standing army in history. Soldiers served for life, not for a king or an empire, but for the betterment of their nation, for the love of their country. They believed in meritocracy. The son of a prince could become a pauper, and the son of a pauper could become a prince. They abolished torture, believing it was a sign of weakness. They kept detailed records of their soldiers' skills, their fighting techniques, their experience and education, and used that data to better their armies. They were one of the first to use psychological warfare. They kept maps, studied geography. They built the first purpose-built hospital for soldiers. They kept livestock, mostly sheep, for food. Their soldiers wore felt hats and sturdy leather boots. Some cavalrymen even wore armor. They rode horses that were bigger than European horses, draft animals that were bigger than oxen, and they used composite bows that could shoot arrows faster and farther than any other bow in the world. But when Genghis Khan went to war, he was ruthless. From 1211 to 1214, he and his generals like Subutai and Yeludashi, they ravaged northern China. In 1211, he besieged the city of Beijing. He built siege towers, catapults, and other machines, and then he burned it to the ground. Historian Rashid al-Din says that in one single day, 40,000 Chinese soldiers were killed outside the city walls, and another 40,000 died inside from starvation. In 1219, he attacked the Khwarezmian Empire, which covered parts of Iran and Central Asia. That year, he took the city of Samarkand. Again, historian Rashid al-Din says that 200,000 soldiers were killed in the streets and outside the city walls. Many more died inside the city from starvation. In 1220, he attacked the city of Bukhara. Again, the same story. Siege towers, catapults, starvation, massive deaths. When Genghis Khan died in 1227, his empire stretched from the Sea of Japan to the Caspian Sea. It stretched from Siberia to the Iranian plateau. At its greatest extent, the Mongol Empire was the largest contiguous land empire in history. If you don't believe me, listen to these numbers. Between 1206 and 1227, Genghis Khan and his immediate successors, they conquered 53 million square miles. That's bigger than the next four largest empires combined. They defeated 66 enemy armies in the field and only lost one battle. One. Historians say that 40 million people were killed in the wars and conquests. But some put the number much higher, as high as 110 million. Either way, it's hard to overstate their impact on the world. And here's something else that's hard to overstate. Historians now believe that at least 8% of Asian men carry his DNA. 8%. You heard that right. His impact was literally written into bloodlines. So who was Genghis Khan? Was he a god of war sent from the heavens? Was he a demon of destruction? Well, actually, he was both. He was a god to his followers. He was a demon to his enemies. And that's why his legend has endured for 800 years. If you want to know more about Genghis Khan, there are two books that I recommend. One is Genghis Khan and the Making of the Modern World by Jack Weatherford. And the other is The Secret History of the Mongols by Rashid al-Din. That's all for now. See you next time. While Mongols thundered across Asia, in England the drama was altogether different. There the year is 1215, and the story is this. The King of England, John, was an absolute monarch. He ruled like a god over his people. But the nobles were fed up with him. They wanted more power. They rebelled and forced King John to sign a document. It was called the Magna Carta. This translates to Great Charter. It was a set of laws that limited the powers of the king. Today we'll look at 3 such laws from the Magna Carta and see how they changed the world. Let's get started. Law number 1, no free man could be imprisoned without trial. In the 13th century, kings ruled like gods in England. They could do pretty much anything, and I mean anything. They could imprison anyone without charging them with a crime. They could take away anyone's property without giving any compensation. And they did not even have to listen to anyone. I repeat, anyone. All this changed with the Magna Carta. This document said that even the king cannot imprison a free man without charging him with a crime and without giving him a fair trial. In other words, no one, not even the king, is above the law. Today we call this rule of law. It is the bedrock of modern democracies. No one is above the law. Everyone must follow it. Law number 2. The king could not impose taxes without consent. Earlier, the King of England could impose taxes at will. After the Magna Carta, he could not. The Charter says that the king cannot levy taxes without the consent of the barons. Now this may sound like a small step, but it was really a giant leap, because it established the principle of representation. For the first time, a ruler was answerable to the ruled. And this was not just for the barons. The Magna Carta stated that no free man would be taxed without his consent. Today we follow this principle in all democracies. Before any bill becomes a law, it has to be passed in the parliament. In other words, the representatives of the people have to approve it. And this is not just for England or Europe. In India, the finance bill is passed only after it is approved by the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha, the lower house and the upper house. Law no. 3. Even the monarch was subject to law. The Magna Carta says that the king's son, who is the heir to the throne, can also be punished if he breaks the law. Till then, the English monarchs were not answerable to anyone. They could do anything they wanted. But now they had to follow the same laws that they made for their people. And this was a big deal because it destroyed the myth of the divine right of kings. What does that mean? That monarchs were chosen by God, and so they were not accountable to anyone? The Magna Carta tore this principle to shreds. It said that the king is just a normal citizen, and he too must follow the law. So why is the Magna Carta so important? Because it was the first of its kind. Sure, there were some good laws in some parts of the world. For instance, in India, the principles of dharma and karma were followed for many, many years. But the Magna Carta was different. It was a charter of rights, a document that limited the powers of the king. It gave rights to the people. It also gave them a way to seek justice. No wonder it's called the Great Charter. It was a big leap for England and for the world. The Magna Carta was written in 1215. It is 800 years old today, yet its principles are modern and very relevant. The rule of law, representation, and accountability. These are the pillars of modern democracies. The Magna Carta gave them to the world. In fact, when the United States was being formed, its founders studied the Magna Carta. They too wanted a government that was limited by law. So they took inspiration from the Magna Carta. When India got its independence, the makers of the Constitution are leaders like Mahatma Gandhi and Dr. Ambedkar. They all studied the Magna Carta. Our Constitution, too, was influenced by it. So the next time you hear about kings and queens, remember this. They might wear fancy dresses and live in palaces, but in reality, they are just normal people. And you know what that means? They must follow the law. That's 1 minute. See you tomorrow. What if I told you there's a place more magnificent than Machu Picchu? A tragedy that rivals the Black Death. A man so wealthy he broke an economy. Well, buckle up, because we're about to embark on a thrilling journey through time. We begin our tale in the bustling city of Teotihuacan, situated on a sparkling lake in what is now Mexico. Now imagine this. You've just stepped into the year 100 AD. The air is alive with the energy of 1,000 craftspeople, all working tirelessly to make this city the jewel of the Aztec Empire. The Great Pyramid of the Moon and the Pyramid of the Sun stand tall, making this place not just a center of trade, but a cultural hub too. In fact, at its peak, this city was so glorious, some historians say it rivaled the grandeur of Rome itself. Can you believe it? But alas, our time here is limited, for the Spanish conquistadors are on their way, and they mean to destroy everything in their path. So let us seize the moment and explore all the wonders this city has to offer before it's too late. Meanwhile, across the ocean, in the heart of Africa, a new player is about to crash onto the world stage. Enter Mansa Musa, the king of the Mali Empire. We're talking 1300s here, folks, and this guy is loaded. I mean, really, really rich. He's got so much gold, he practically single-handedly crashes the gold market in Europe, causing an economic crisis that lasts for over a century. Imagine being so wealthy you break an economy. That's real wealth. Now, Mansa wasn't just a gold digger. He was a visionary leader who expanded his empire, built impressive structures, and promoted trade across the known world. And let's not forget his spectacular pilgrimage to Mecca, an epic journey that makes history books come alive. But our adventure doesn't stop there. Oh no, not by a long shot. Because next we find ourselves face to face with one of history's greatest villains, the Black Death, also known as the bubonic plague. And let me tell you, this ain't your average flu. We're talking a horrifying disease that wipes out a whopping 60% of Europe's population. That's more than 25 million people gone in the blink of an eye. It was so bad it changed the course of history forever. Imagine the year is 1346, and you're strolling through a medieval town when suddenly, boom, you're hit with symptoms that would make even the bravest warrior tremble. Fever, chills, weakness, and then the grand finale. Black spots that spread like wildfire across your skin. Yep, this plague was no joke. Spread through fleas and rats, infecting entire communities and leaving them utterly decimated. Now, let us fast forward to the year 1866. In the heart of London, and things are about to get steamy. The Industrial Revolution is in full swing. Factories are pumping out goods like crazy, and people are flocking to cities like London in search of a better life. But hold on a minute, what's this stench? Ah yes, the infamous London fog, a thick, toxic cloud of smoke and fog that's choking the city. Can you imagine trying to breathe in that mess? As the sun sets, the fog rolls in, blanketing the city in an eerie darkness that hides all sorts of dangers. People struggle to see through the gloom, and it's a recipe for disaster. Add a little panic to the mix, and you've got yourself a nightmarish scenario straight out of a horror story. And that's just the beginning, because as the Industrial Revolution chugs along, child labor becomes a major player. Children as young as 5 years old are working in dangerous conditions, facing long hours, low wages, and a high risk of injury. It's a dark chapter in history that makes you wonder how things got so bad in the first place. But fear not, brave viewers, for knowledge is power. By understanding the past, we can work towards a better future. So keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep fighting for a better world. Who knows, you might just be the one to change history for the better. While Europe was still busy fighting over land and crowns in the 14th century, Africa produced one of the most fascinating rulers of all time. Mansa Musa of Mali was so wealthy that people joked, if being rich were a crime, he would be guilty of the greatest sin. Recently, I stumbled upon a tweet comparing Mansa's wealth to Elon Musk's. While it's hard to compare wealth across centuries due to inflation and different currencies, some estimates put Mansa's peak wealth at over 400 billion in today's money. That's nearly double Elon's current wealth. So let us explore how Mansa made his fortune, and how he lavished gold on all passers-by during his pilgrimage to Mecca. Mansa's story began in the West African kingdom of Mali, which was richer than all of Europe combined at the time. Part of this wealth came from salt, which they traded with the North African kingdoms. Salt was considered a luxury good back then, since it preserved food and prevented scurvy, making it an essential resource for long journeys like pilgrimages. The trade route from the Sahara to the Atlantic Ocean, controlled by Mali, made them indispensable to European salt traders. But what truly turned Mali into a treasure trove was gold. Since the 9th century, Arab traders had come to West Africa seeking gold, believing it held magical powers. They found it near the river Niger, in the form of yellow rocks called laterite. Intrigued, the Arabs offered anything the Africans wanted in exchange for gold. Little did they know they had just struck a deal that would make Mali the richest kingdom in the world. Fast forward to the late 13th century, when Mansa took the throne after his father's death. Unlike his predecessors, Mansa wasn't satisfied with mere wealth. He wanted more. He cared for power, recognition, and fame. But first, he needed to control the gold mines. Before Mansa's reign, miners had toiled under harsh conditions without any records or organization. It was chaotic and inefficient. To change this, Mansa employed a brilliant strategy. He assembled the best minds from across Mali, including former rivals, and created a centralized gold registry known as the Pot of Kinson. This innovation allowed Mali to track, collect, and sell gold more efficiently than ever before. Consequently, Mali's gold production rose significantly, bringing in immense profits. This increase in revenue led to more jobs, higher salaries for miners, and ultimately Mali became the largest gold producer worldwide. But gold was only part of the equation. Mansa knew that to achieve his goals, he needed allies. Enter Abukari, the second of the Kingdom of Songhai. While their countries were rivals, Mansa saw an opportunity to expand Mali's territory and secure its western border. So he offered a deal: marriage between their children and an alliance against their common enemy, the Kingdom of Takra. Abubakar agreed, and soon Mali and Songhai were united through family ties. But Mansa wasn't done yet. He went further to conquer the once mighty Kingdom of Tekrur, absorbing it into Mali. With Tekrur's skilled builders now under his rule, Mansa embarked on a massive construction project, building mosques, palaces, and universities, employing thousands of architects and artisans. Suddenly, Mali wasn't just a gold mine, it was a hub of activity, trade, and culture. This economic boom attracted merchants from all over the world. Among them were the Portuguese, who entered Mali hoping to buy gold directly instead of trading for it through Arabs. But Mansa wasn't interested in dealing with them. He told them straight, "I have no need of your coppers, nor do I desire them for any price." And that's exactly what he did. Instead, he bought gold from Arab traders and exchanged it for other goods, giving him an even greater advantage over the Europeans. By doing so, Mansa cut out middlemen, saved gold for future generations, and made Mali self-sufficient. In essence, Mansa's economic strategies transformed Mali from a simple gold mine to an influential empire. His tactics included tracking gold production, forging strategic alliances, conquering rival kingdoms, and minimizing foreign influence, all contributing to Mali's unparalleled prosperity. With his wealth secured, Mansa set his sights on something else: expanding Islam in Africa and showing off his wealth. So what does a rich African king do? He sets out on a pilgrimage to Mecca, spending tens of thousands of dollars. Well, actually, he spent much more than that. Estimates vary, but he is said to have traveled with tens of thousands of people, including soldiers and civilians. Many sources mention a vast caravan of camels carrying gold, gifts, and supplies. One story says there were 60,000 men and 21 tons of gold, while another puts it at 21 tons of gold and 60 elephants. We don't know for sure because some accounts are contradictory. For example, some say he left Mali with 40 elephants and returned with 100,000, suggesting he captured or received the rest. Others claim he never went to war and only acquired elephants as gifts. As for the gold, some stories say he brought back more than he took, having received additional gifts along the way. But others claim he spent so much on charity that he barely returned with anything. We also don't know how many camels he traveled with, since some accounts mention caravans, but not a specific number. However, there is one thing we know for sure: the journey was expensive. Some scholars estimate that Musa spent $37 million in today's currency on his pilgrimage. So where did he go? Like any other Muslim, Musa followed the Hajj route, starting in Medina and ending in Mecca. Along the way, he performed various rituals and visited important sites. But his journey was far from ordinary. He wasn't just a pilgrim. He was a king on a mission. He lavished gold on all passers-by, helping the needy and buying favor. In Cairo, he gifted so much gold that he practically bankrupted the city. According to some sources, he lavished gold on everyone from beggars to sultans. Even if someone didn't want gold, he would pay them in silver or copper. And if they didn't want those either, he forced them to accept whatever amount he deemed fit. This generosity continued until he gave away almost all his gold. Some say he handed out around 80% of it, leaving only enough for the journey back home. Others say he spent even more, practically giving away everything he took with him. Either way, he must have felt pretty light on his way back. The effects of his gold shower were disastrous. Overnight, gold lost value, devaluing Egypt's currency and causing inflation that lasted for years. People who had saved gold for emergencies could no longer afford basic goods and services. They had to borrow money to survive. This economic crisis affected everyday life, making food, clothing, and housing unaffordable for many. And even after Mansa left, things didn't improve right away. It took several years for the economy to recover and for people to regain their purchasing power. However, there's a twist to this story. Some historians argue that Musa's gold giveaway wasn't just a whim. It was a strategic move to help Muslims in need and to get rid of low-quality gold. You see, gold comes in different qualities, from pure 24-karat gold to alloys mixed with other metals. Pure gold is rare and valuable, but not very practical since it's soft and can be easily damaged. Alloys, on the other hand, are more durable, but not as prestigious. Mansa supposedly noticed that most of the gold items in Cairo were made of lower-quality alloys and realized that people didn't know the difference. So he decided to do something about it. While showering gold on the streets, he also explained to people which gold was better, and encouraged them to trade their inferior items for higher-quality ones. This way, he helped them upgrade their possessions and reminded them that true value lay in the quality, not just the quantity of gold. So while his actions may have temporarily disrupted the economy, they also raised people's awareness and improved their long-term wealth. Upon returning to Mali, realizing the importance of education, he established the University of Sanka in Timbuktu, transforming the city into a center of Islamic learning. This institution drew scholars from across the Muslim world, fostering cultural exchange and intellectual growth. His dedication to knowledge helped Mali gain prestige and influence, cementing Mansa's legacy as a great patron of education. And that's the end of the episode. If you enjoyed this episode and want to watch more episodes, please subscribe and leave a comment below. Thank you. The year is 1345. For decades, Europeans have been locked in a desperate battle for survival. But far across the Atlantic, another civilization was rising. In the 13th century, the nomadic Mexico tribe had settled down. They'd heard tales of a great city in the east, the mythical place where the sun was born. Their god Huitzilopochtli told them to build their city, where they found an eagle perched on a cactus, holding a snake in its beak. The young warrior saw this exact vision on an island in Lake Texcoco, and there, on that very spot, they built Tenochtitlan, which in Nahuatl means prickly pear city. It started as a small village, but soon grew into a city like no other. Canals crisscrossed it like Venice. Floating gardens called chinampas produced maize, beans, and squash. The Aztecs farmed on the water, an ingenious solution to a seemingly impossible problem. They were living on a lake with poor soil quality and a lack of arable land. But by 1473, when the city was at its peak, Tenochtitlan was home to over 400,000 people. At its heart stood the Templo Mayor, a great twin temple dedicated to the gods of war and rain. Every year, the Mexica people performed the ritual of the new fire ceremony. In the sacred courtyard between the two temples, priests would perform human sacrifices, capturing the life essence of the victims to keep the sun at its zenith. From here, the ruler of Tenochtitlan, also known as the Huitzilopochtli, or the Great Speaker, would address his people. His royal palace stood just behind the temple complex, a sprawling structure with many courtyards and gardens. Meanwhile, back in Europe, the Black Death was raging. Famine and hardship were commonplace. Life expectancy was just 35 years. If you managed to survive past your 5th birthday, you'd probably die in the winter from cold exposure or starvation. By contrast, in the 15th century, Aztec children enjoyed a carefree life. Life was so good in Tenochtitlan that its citizens were often puzzled by the Spanish descriptions of starving street children in Europe. The Aztecs lived in a world of luxury and abundance. While European peasants toiled for their food, the Aztecs had plenty of leisure time. When the Spanish arrived, they were astounded by the city's many merchants, artisans, and traders. There were professional ball players who competed in a sport similar to soccer. The Aztecs even had their own version of fast food. Food stalls were located all over the city. The most popular dish was a type of tamale made from corn, dough, beans, and salsa. Tenochtitlan was also home to one of the largest and most impressive building projects undertaken by any pre-Columbian civilization. Construction began around 1473 on what would become the greatest pyramid ever built, the Pyramid of the Feathered Serpent. When completed in 1510, it stood 265 feet tall, almost twice the height of the Great Pyramid of Giza. The pyramid was dedicated to the Aztec rain god, Tlaloc. Its builders carved huge stone blocks into the shape of feathers, then painstakingly fitted them together to resemble a giant feathered serpent. But while the Aztecs were building their empire, the Spanish were preparing to invade. When the Spaniards arrived in 1519, they were shocked by what they saw. They marveled at the city's grand avenues, bustling marketplaces, and magnificent buildings. But it wasn't long before the Spanish conquistadors set their sights on the riches of Tenochtitlan. They formed an alliance with some of the Aztecs' enemies and rivals, then marched on the city with guns blazing. The ensuing battle lasted for 2 years. By the time the Spanish finally captured Tenochtitlan in 1521, the once great city was in ruins. The conquistadors destroyed the Aztecs' great temples, palaces, and pyramids, leaving only a few crumbling walls and foundations. Today, visitors can explore the ruins of Tenochtitlan and marvel at the ingenuity of the Aztec people. The story of the Aztecs is one of incredible achievement and resilience in the face of adversity. They created a thriving civilization on the shores of Lake Texcoco, and their legacy lives on in the hearts and minds of the Mexican people. Did you know that? Meanwhile, in Europe, England and France embarked on a quarrel that lasted not just a season or two, but more than a century. Yeah, no spoilers here. This is how long it lasted. So if you want to know the reason why, well then let's get started. So this is the very best way to summarize what happened. During the 1300s, the English king also held this piece of France right over here, called the Duchy of Guienne. Then the French king Charles IV died in 1364, and since he had no male heirs, the English king Edward III decided, well, now I'm going to take the French throne. And that's pretty much it. That's why they fought for 116 years. Two guys who both thought they had a claim to the same throne. Now, if you were paying attention, which you should be, you might be wondering, wait, didn't France win this war? Yeah, they did. But throughout most of the war, it looked like England was going to win. In fact, by 1429, they controlled all of this and only lost it all within the next 25 years. So how does the nation that lost for most of the war end up winning it? Well, this is an example of how military technology and tactics really do matter, because the English victory was built on old-fashioned medieval tactics, while the French victory was based on new tactics that took advantage of new weapons. So first off, these are the tactics and technology that gave England their early successes. Okay, so longbows. Like we've said many times, they had been around since the 12th century, though they really came into their own during this war. Longbows could shoot arrows about 300 yards. These arrows could go through chainmail and even plate armor, though it helped if they had a wooden shield to aim for. Also, longbows were cheap and easy to make, and they were incredibly effective. So English kings always maintained a large force of longbowmen. In fact, at one point during this war, they levied a special tax to pay for 10,000 of them. Next is that whole professional army thing that England started. Before the 14th century, armies were made up of nobles leading their vassals and retainers into battle. It was a pretty amateurish affair. But in the 1330s, the English kings realized that in order to win a war, you need professional soldiers. They created a national system for training and outfitting soldiers. These professional soldiers were paid full-time foot soldiers with fixed salaries and pensions. They drilled constantly and followed laws that required them to be physically fit. As a result, they became incredibly effective fighters. Finally, there was the English longbow, men who fought alongside the archers, called the yeomen. The yeomen were the backbone of the English army. They wore helmets and chainmail and carried long swords and daggers. But most importantly, they also carried longbows. The combination of longbow and yeoman was devastating. At the battles of Sluys and Poitiers, the English handily defeated the French. The first battle was in 1346 when the English fleet surprised the French navy and won a decisive victory. About 30,000 Englishmen landed and met up with 8,000 exiles from northern France, who hated the English rule and wanted to rebel. Together, they ambushed a larger French force at the Battle of Crécy. One historian estimates that 1,500 knights and 4,000 men at arms were killed, along with an unknown but likely large number of common soldiers. To put it bluntly, was a disaster for French knights. For the first time, mounted knights faced a superior force of English longbowmen and yeomen, and they lost. In fact, in 1360, after 14 years of fighting, the English still controlled all of northern France. They had won several other battles, including a second battle in 1346, and the Battle of Puteaux in 1356. Each time, English longbowmen tore through French knights. But if there's one battle that perfectly illustrates the power of longbows, it's the Battle of Agincourt. This battle happened in 1415 during one of the last campaigns of Henry V, aka the guy whose story Shakespeare wrote a play about. Henry wanted to invade France and claim the French throne, except, to get to France, he had to march his army through Belgium. And while he was marching through Belgium, the King of France got nervous, assembled a massive force, about 30,000 men, and ambushed Henry near the town of Agincourt. So Henry, who had about 9,000 soldiers, lost half his army to disease on the march. Then he had to fight an army 3 times his size. It was not looking good. But then the rain came. You see, the field where they planned to meet was a swamp, and it had been raining for days. The French came charging into battle, but they quickly found out that they were wading through mud and water. Their armor weighed them down and made it hard to move. Their weapons couldn't reach the English ranks because they were too far apart. Meanwhile, the English longbowmen were loving it. They could shoot much better in the rain than the French could fight. By the end, 10,000 French soldiers lay dead on the battlefield. Agincourt was an absolute disaster for the French, and it made Henry V a hero. So for the next few decades, it looked like France would lose this war. But then something unexpected happened. This was a teenage peasant girl who started having visions that told her to drive the English out of France. She was a bit insistent, so her local priest eventually agreed to take her to the king. When Charles VII heard her story, he agreed to help her raise an army. He outfitted her in fancy clothes, put a sword at her side, and called her Joan of Arc. And so, with Joan of Arc leading the way, the French army started winning. She led them to victories at the Siege of Orleans and the Battle of Patay, which pushed the English back across the Loire River. Shortly after, Joan of Arc went to fight the English at the Siege of Rheims. But while she was there, the English captured her and sold her to the Bishop of Paris, who put her on trial for heresy and witchcraft. They found her guilty and burned her at the stake. Though despite her execution, the English soon lost the war. Now, we don't know exactly why they lost, but we have some good guesses. For one thing, Joan of Arc inspired the French army and lifted French morale, which was super important. Soldiers who believe in their cause fight better. Secondly, by this point, English manpower was running out. England had a population of about 2 million people, while France had 15 million. Even though the English won lots of battles, they were slowly bleeding themselves out.
Finally,
the French started using gunpowder weapons like cannons, which proved effective against the English. In fact, in 1429, the English controlled all of this, while the French controlled all of this. Within 25 years, the English would lose it all. For example, in 1453, the English were besieging the city of Castellon when the French showed up with an artillery piece that fired cannonballs the size of barrels. The English never stood a chance. By the end of the siege, 1,000 Englishmen lay dead on the battlefield. Castellon is considered the last battle of the 100 Years' War. All in all, the war lasted longer than anyone expected, and it changed England and France forever. First, France will always remember Joan of Arc as a martyr who sacrificed herself for her country. Second, the war bankrupted both countries. The English treasury went from solvent to insolvent. They went from having a positive balance to owing money to their creditors. The French weren't doing so well either. After the war, France and England remained bitter rivals, though they wouldn't fight another major battle until the 19th century, and by then, they had invented rifled muskets and machine guns. So, things were different. Click here to learn about one of the most famous battles in history, or click here to learn about another medieval war. Whichever you choose, I'll see you there. As if endless war was not enough, a far deadlier enemy appeared. The Black Death, bubonic plague, pestilence, call it what you will. But from 1347, carried by rats and fleas along trade routes, the plague swept across Europe. Victims developed swollen boils, fevers, and most died within days. In just a few years, 75 to 200 million people perished. That's nearly 1/3 of Europe's population. It's the deadliest pandemic in history. And yet the story doesn't end there. For as devastating as the plague was, it also had a strange afterglow, a silver lining if you like. For as it turns out, the plague also helped bring down medieval society and pave the way for the modern world. So join us as we look at how the plague killed millions and changed the course of history. The Black Death is one of the worst plagues in human history. So how did it start? Well, the cause was a bacterium called Yersinia pestis, which still exists today, thankfully much less common. In the Middle Ages, the disease would start in rodents, spread to fleas, and then to humans. There are three types of the disease: bubonic plague, which we're talking about here, septicemic plague, and pneumonic plague. Bubonic plague starts with fever and pain before boils appear under the skin around the groin or armpit. These swell because the lymph nodes have become infected. Then as the bacteria spreads throughout the body, the blood poisoning aspect kicks in, moving into the third stage. If untreated, the disease is almost always fatal. Medieval medicine had no idea what was causing this. The treatments were not very effective, though bloodletting, leeching, and the application of animal parts was attempted. Sometimes the disease was so bad that the boils would just burst and the victim die soon afterwards. Given the lack of refrigeration, dead bodies would often be left lying around. And with over 75 million people dying in Europe alone, mass graves were needed. No wonder that with so much death around them, many turned to religion for an explanation. Some blamed Jews, who they said had poisoned wells, while others blamed Christians, saying they had been punished by God for their sins. Flagellants would go around whipping themselves as penance, hoping to atone for the sinfulness of mankind. Others believed that the only way to stop the plague was to kill the supposed source of the disease, and so began killing cats and dogs. This didn't work, of course, but it did mean that when the plague hit, there were even fewer cats around to catch mice. At its height in 1350, the plague was killing up to 100,000 people a day in some cities. Florence lost half of its population, while London lost 2/3. Even entire villages would be wiped out in some cases. And with all this death, the survivors started to notice something. There weren't enough bodies to bury everyone, and churches were overflowing. Priests couldn't perform funerals fast enough. The mass graves were filling up and dead bodies were being left where they fell. Something had to give. And so during the 14th century, the Catholic Church modified some of its teachings to suit the times. It allowed priests to shorten the ritual for the burial of the dead, so that they could deal with the backlog. They also allowed the exhumation of bodies, so that only a handful of the deceased could be buried, with the rest of the remains being thrown into mass graves. At the same time, some Christian thinkers started to modify their beliefs about death. For instance, the idea of limbo for unborn children who died before baptism was introduced by theologians such as theologian John Duns Scotus. Limbo was a place for these poor souls to go until they could be saved by later Christians. Such changes would not have occurred had it not been for the plague. We can never know for sure how many people died from the plague, but estimates say that around 75 to 200 million people were killed. And when you think that there were barely 350 to 400 million people alive in the world at the time, that's a lot of deaths. Put another way, it's estimated that the plague killed between 30 and 60% of the population of England, 40 and 50% of the population of France, and 50% of the population of Italy. Some places were hit harder than others, of course. Entire villages would sometimes be wiped out, and in some cases, 100% of the population died. The worst affected area was probably Central Asia. Here, more than half of the population is thought to have died. But the plague then moved west, through Russia, Poland, Lithuania, Germany, Austria, Switzerland, Italy, France, Spain, and England. With so many people dying, the effects on society were immense. Entire professions would be wiped out. The Black Death had reached England in 1348, and by 1350, things were getting bad. King Edward III was preparing for war against the French, and needed able-bodied men to fight. But with the plague raging, many of the regular soldiers had died. Desperate, he turned to the peasants, issuing a proclamation that forced them to serve in the royal army. The problem was that the peasants had other ideas. With labor shortages everywhere, they were in a good bargaining position. Many simply refused to sign up, and instead demanded higher wages and better conditions from their landlords. This was the beginning of a trend that would see the rigid feudal system of medieval Europe gradually dismantled. Before the plague, peasants were tied to the land they worked. They couldn't leave without their lord's permission. If they did leave, they would lose the protection of their lord, making them easy prey for bandits. After the plague, things were different. Workers were now in a strong bargaining position. If their lord didn't pay them well, they could simply go and work for someone else. This led to a gradual weakening of the old order. Peasants began to demand rights and freedoms previously unheard of. One example of this was the English Statute of Laborers of 1351, which tried to put a cap on how much workers could charge for their services. Clearly, the lawmakers knew they were in trouble when they had to pass laws limiting how much people could earn. Another effect of the plague was the gradual emancipation of women. Before the plague, women's roles were limited mostly to the domestic sphere. However, with the plague killing off huge numbers of people, women were now needed to work in the fields. Between 1349 and 1350, for instance, the average woman worker earned 60% of what her male counterpart earned. In the city, things were similar. Women were needed to keep society running, so they took on jobs previously done by men, working in mills, breweries, shops, and even farms. While things would return to normal after the plague, the fact that women had proven themselves capable in the workplace meant that their status in society had been raised. In art, too, the plague had an effect. The macabre nature of the disease meant that artists were inspired to produce works depicting the horrors of the disease. One famous example is The Triumph of Death by Peter Bruegel the Elder, which depicts skeletons mowing down people regardless of social standing. Other paintings show people fleeing the disease, hiding indoors, or burning cats. While art was to change drastically in the Renaissance, many believe that the plague, with its focus on death, played a part in preparing the way for such a change. The plague eventually ended, but nobody knows exactly why. Maybe our ancestors had built up immunity. Maybe the fleas that spread the disease died out. Or maybe it was just the changing weather. Whatever the reason, the plague was finally over. Its effects would be felt for centuries. While the plague devastated Europe, it's important to remember that it wasn't unique to the continent. The plague first emerged in China and India, and eventually spread across the Middle East and Africa. But Europe was by far the worst hit area, and its social, economic, and political effects the most profound. Had it not been for the plague, the transition to the modern era would have been very different. The shortage of labor that resulted from the deaths would play a key role in dismantling the feudal system and paving the way for a more balanced society. So perhaps the greatest legacy of the plague is not so much the terrible toll it took in lives, but rather how it changed the course of history forever. And now, drumroll, please. Welcome to the 14th century. Please pick up your Go set and settle down. Our first story is about an emperor who literally drowned the world in gold. Meet Mansa Musa. He was the ruler of the Mali Empire in Africa. Now Mansa wasn't a believer in banks or financial institutions. He thought gold was best stored well on one's person. So when he went on a pilgrimage in 1324, he decided to shower gold on all passers-by. Historians say he gifted away so much gold, it practically became worthless for around 10 years. Can you imagine? Our next story is about a mighty empire that built a city on a lake. Let me introduce you to the Aztecs. They lived in what is today Mexico. By the 14th century, they were a powerful tribe. In fact, their capital city, Tenochtitlan, was a marvel to behold. It had canals and floating gardens. The city looked like a dream, almost like Venice in Italy. But you know what they say about dreams, don't you? They turn into nightmares. And that's what happened to Tenochtitlan. By the end of the century, the city was destroyed. Today, only ruins remain. Our third story is about a war that lasted for 100 years. You heard that right, 100 years. In the 14th century, England and France couldn't decide who owned some villages, so they fought a war. At first, the English won. They even captured the French king. But then the French took over. They executed English prisoners and things got pretty messy. This went on for 116 years until finally, in 1360, the English king gave up. This war was called the 100 Years' War. Now let's talk about a terror that you couldn't see but would kill millions. We call it the Black Death. It was the bubonic plague. It started in Asia. From there it traveled to Europe. Some historians say it arrived in the British port of Melcombe in 1348. The disease spread fast. People were dying left, right, and center. There was no cure. Some say it killed 30 to 50% of Europe's population. Imagine losing so many people, 1 out of every 2. How would you cope? Some survivors even claimed the plague was God's punishment. You see, back then, science was not very developed. People blamed God, ghosts, or evil spirits for everything that went wrong. Our 5th story is about a voyage that changed the world. The year was 1492. The explorer was Christopher Columbus. He wanted to find a faster route to Asia. Little did he know he would end up in the Americas. When he landed in the Bahamas, he thought he was in India, so he named the natives Indians. That's why we call them Native Americans today. Now let's look at a map. What do you see? Continents. There are 7 of them: Asia, Africa, North America, South America, Europe, Australia, and Antarctica. Did you know these landmasses were never connected? I mean, just think about it. If Columbus could sail from Europe to the Americas, then why couldn't people travel from Africa to the United States? Well, because they didn't know there was another continent between them. That landmass is called Africa. The Atlantic Ocean separated the continents. Of course, this changed when Columbus made his voyage. He literally mapped the world. And finally, our last story is about a dynasty that ruled India. It was the Delhi Sultanate. It was founded by a man named Aibak. His tomb still stands in Delhi. It's now an Islamic monument. The dynasty lasted for 150 years. After Aibak came Muhammad bin Tughlaq. He built a new capital at Diajiri. But later, another ruler shifted the capital to Delhi. They built grand palaces and mosques. The dynasty also saw a lot of bloodshed. The ruler Alauddin Khalji murdered his own father to take the throne. Later, he unleashed a reign of terror. He plundered villages, looted temples. Under his rule, Delhi became notorious for being lawless. Eventually, the dynasty was overthrown by Timur. He destroyed Delhi, and with that, the 14th century came to an end. What did we learn today? A lot, I'm sure. From plagues to voyages, from dynasties to wars, the 14th century was dramatic. It was sad, it was violent, but it was also exciting. And as we close this chapter, remember this: every ending is also a beginning. The Renaissance was just around the corner. In India, the mighty Mughal Empire was about to begin. Across the world, the age of discovery was about to start. Men would girdle the earth, discovering new lands and new trade routes. The 15th century was waiting in the wings, and now it's time to go. Please pick up your Go set and do share this with your friends. See you next time. And so we have arrived at the end of our journey through medieval Europe, a long dark night in which everything good was burned, killed, or taxed. In all seriousness, it's hard to imagine a more depressing way to live. Medieval life sucked. But just as sunrise follows the longest night, Europe entered a new age. Morning had broken. This was the Renaissance, the rebirth of European civilization. Europeans rediscovered the classics, the art and literature of ancient Greece and Rome. They also started exploring the world, discovering new lands and trading with distant people. And when I say they were doing this by accident, I do mean it. The Renaissance was not planned. It wasn't some well-thought-out strategy to get out of the Middle Ages. It just kind of happened. It's like when your mom lets out a yawn and suddenly spring cleaning is happening. Europeans began questioning long-held beliefs and thinking about the world in completely new ways. Now, if you think that sounds boring, then you clearly haven't spent enough time in school. Just kidding. This was anything but boring. Let me show you what I mean. Here's a fact that will blow your mind. And remember, you heard it here first. Okay, here goes. Get ready. Florence was a better place to be gay than Paris. What? Well, yes, because while homosexuality was illegal in most of Europe, Florence was somewhat more chill about it. In fact, the government of Florence passed laws protecting homosexuals from discrimination and violence. So if you were gay in the Middle Ages, you wanted to be in Florence? But why Florence? What made this city so special? Well, it helped that Florence was filthy rich. Thanks to the booming wool trade, Florence was one of the wealthiest cities in Europe. Its bankers and merchants were making huge profits. And with money comes power. Lots of power. The rich elite of Florence used this power to take control of the government and make the city into a republic. That meant no king or queen to tell them what to do. Instead, 2 elected heads of government, called priors, ran the city. The priors served for a year and then had to step down. Next in line was the next richest guy. So if you were born poor, you wouldn't become any richer by the time you became an old man. But if you were born rich, then your chances of being run over by a peasant revolt were fairly high. But let's talk about what everyone really wants to know. How did Florence go from medieval to modern? Well, many scholars believe that the Renaissance started right there in Florence. And the reason for that was humanism. Humanists were scholars and writers who studied the classics and based their ideas on the classical Greek and Roman civilizations. They were fascinated with humans rather than focusing on sin and salvation. They believed that people could do great things. It's pretty obvious from the name, right? Humanism was more than just an intellectual movement. It was a revolution in the way people thought about the world. And it was this new way of thinking that kicked off the Renaissance. Humanism also inspired artists to capture the beauty of the human form in their work. Think of the Greek statues that you see in museums. That was the influence of humanism. Before this, art was mostly religious. The point of a painting or a sculpture was to teach a lesson. With humanism, artists were freer to explore the world and express themselves. That's why the Renaissance produced some of the greatest works of art in history. Florence was also the home of the Medici family, one of the richest families in Europe. They loved art and they used their wealth to support artists. One member of the Medici family was Cosimo de' Medici, who was the de facto ruler of Florence for decades. He was so powerful that he was known as the father of the Renaissance. Talk about an awesome dad. He promoted education and the arts. And under his rule, Florence became a center of learning and culture. The Medici family also commissioned works of art from some of the best artists of the time, such as the famous Medici Chapel, which is a tomb for members of the Medici family. Another thing that helped the Renaissance was the invention of linear perspective. This was a way of making paintings look three-dimensional. It made it possible to create a sense of depth and realism. And guess who invented linear perspective? You got it, Brunelleschi? Dad. It was a big deal because it allowed artists to create incredibly realistic paintings that looked like photographs. If you want to know more about linear perspective, you can watch our episode on Brunelleschi's dome. One other very important thing to keep in mind is that unlike the Dark Ages, the Renaissance was not a pan-European phenomenon. Most of the action was happening in Italy, especially in Florence. But the north of Europe was still busy burning people at the stake. So why did the Renaissance start in Italy? Well, there are many theories, but the main reason is that Italy was closer to the Eastern Roman Empire. When the Eastern Romans fell, many of their scholars and intellectuals fled to Italy. They brought with them the knowledge of the Greeks and the Romans, which helped to kickstart the Renaissance. Additionally, the Italian peninsula has always been divided into small states and republics. The decentralization of political power in Italy created a favorable environment for the rise of independent city-states like Florence and Venice, which were wealthy and culturally vibrant. They became centers of trade and commerce and attracted merchants, artists, and scholars from all over Europe. And then came Venice. You might not know much about Venice, but let me tell you, it was an amazing place. Venice was a collection of islands in a lagoon, and it was connected to the mainland by a single bridge. The only way to get in or out of Venice was by boat. This made Venice very defensible, and it also made it very rich. Venice was a hub for traders from all over the Mediterranean. They came to Venice to buy and sell goods. They also came to visit the beautiful St. Mark's Basilica. The basilica was covered with gold, and it was one of the most beautiful buildings in Europe. This splendor impressed everyone who visited Venice, and it made Venetian officials very proud. Okay, now let's talk about Rome. Rome was the capital of the Holy Roman Empire, and it was also the seat of the Pope. The popes were very powerful, and they used their power to promote art and culture. In fact, the popes built some of the most beautiful buildings in Rome, such as the Vatican Palace and St. Peter's Basilica. These buildings were designed by some of the greatest architects of the Renaissance, such as Donato, Bramante, and Michelangelo. Rome was also home to some of the greatest artists of the Renaissance, such as Raphael and Caravaggio. However, the Renaissance was not just about art and architecture. It was also about science and exploration. For example, during the Renaissance, scientists began to challenge the old geocentric theory, which said that the Earth was the center of the universe. Instead, they began to believe that the sun was the center of the solar system. This was a revolutionary idea, and it changed the way we understand the universe. And finally, let's talk about Germany. Germany was one of the last countries to enter the Renaissance. but it quickly became one of the most important centers of Renaissance art and culture. This was due in large part to the patronage of the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V. Charles V was the most powerful ruler in Europe, and he used his power to promote art and culture. He also played a key role in ending the Middle Ages. As we saw in our previous videos, the Black Death devastated Europe, killing millions of people and destroying the feudal system. The Renaissance was a response to the devastation of the Middle Ages. It was a time of rebirth and renewal. Europeans began to explore the world and discover new lands. They also began to question the old ways of thinking and believing. And they started to focus on the beauty of the human form and the potential of human beings. Overall, the Renaissance was a time of great change and upheaval. It was a time when the old order of things was overturned and a new world was born. Okay, folks, we have come to the end of our journey through medieval Europe. Now we're going to take a little break, and then we'll continue our journey through world history. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe. We have tons of fun stuff planned for the future. I'll see you next time. While Europe was busy painting and inventing, India was also transforming. From the 13th century, the Delhi Sultanate held power, and they spread Islam in the subcontinent. Under their rule, Delhi grew into a thriving capital. It had massive forts, beautiful mosques, and bustling markets filled with traders from Persia to China. But soon, from the mountains of Central Asia, a new dynasty would march into India. They were called the Mughals, and they would build one of the greatest empires in Indian history. But before we get to them, let's rewind a bit. After the fall of the Khwarezmians, Central Asia was a battleground for many ambitious rulers. But one man stood out. His name was Timur, or Tamerlane. He carved out an empire by conquering Persia, Afghanistan, and parts of India. But unlike his predecessors, Timur didn't really care about expanding his empire further. He just wanted to hold on to what he had. So he divided his vast lands among his sons, one of whom was called Babur. Now Babur was an ambitious ruler. He wanted more than just a small slice of the Timurid Empire. He wanted all of it. So when his father died, he kicked his brothers out of their shares and declared himself the emperor of a new empire. It was the Mughal Empire, an offshoot of the Timurid dynasty. The problem was, most of his new empire was in India, which meant Babur had to cross the Himalayas to reach his capital. And that was not easy, because guarding the passes were the Afghans. They were fierce warriors who lived in these rugged mountains. But Babur was up for the challenge. In 1526, he led his army down the mountains and defeated the Afghans at the First Battle of Panipat. It was a decisive victory that gave Babur control over northern India. From there, he marched south to conquer Delhi, which was ruled by an old ally of the Timurids, Ibrahim Lodi. The two had met in 1519, when Ibrahim invited Babur to invade India. Together they defeated the Delhi Sultan, but Ibrahim soon realized that Babur was more ambitious than he was, and that he wanted all of Delhi for himself. So Ibrahim tried to double-cross him, but Babur was too smart for him. He ambushed Ibrahim's army at the Second Battle of Panipat and won. This victory made Babur the undisputed master of northern India. But he didn't stop there. He went on to conquer large parts of central India as well. By the end of his reign, the Mughal Empire stretched from Kabul in the west to the eastern regions of modern-day Bangladesh. That's quite an achievement for a man who once fled to the hills to escape his father's wrath. Babur was not just a good fighter, he was also a brilliant administrator. He reorganized the army, reformed the finances, and kept a close watch on the provinces. But what Babur is perhaps best known for today is the introduction of a new system of land revenue. See, when Babur came to India, he brought with him the ideas of his ancestors, the Mongols. One such idea was the concept of surveying land for taxation purposes. It's back in Mongolia, the emperors used to send officials to measure the size of each farm and the number of houses in each village. Then they would use this data to calculate how much tax every subject owed. Babur thought this was a great system, so he brought it to India. It wasn't very useful, though, because most of the villages in India weren't surveyed. There was no way Babur could measure the size of every farm in his empire. But what he could do was measure the produce of each farm. This is how the new system worked. Farmers had to pay 1/10 of the produce as taxes. Now, this was less complicated than the old system, and it also ensured that the farmers always had something to pay the emperor. If their crops failed, they wouldn't have to mortgage their lands to the moneylenders. And if their crops were good, they would have more to give to the emperor. It was a win-win situation. At least that's what was on paper. In reality, there were a lot of problems. For starters, the Mughal officials often flouted these rules. They would demand extra produce from the farmers, or they would just take their land.
Yes.
That's what happened to the peasants in Gujarat. They refused to pay the new land revenue, so the mules took their land and gave it to the soldiers. Naturally, the peasants were not happy. They rebelled against the mules, but they were no match for Babur's artillery. Soon the rebellion was crushed, and the peasants were back to work. Well, not all of them. Some had fled to the hills to escape the Mughal tyranny. These were the early ancestors of the Rajputs, a warrior community that will play a very important role in the upcoming chapters. Anyway, after crushing the rebellion, Babur felt a bit guilty about how his rule had affected the common folk. In an effort to make amends, he built mosques, schools, and gardens all over his empire. But his favorite project was in Delhi. It was a grand complex of buildings set amidst beautiful gardens. It was the first of its kind in India, and it became the seat of the Mughal Empire. As for Babur, he continued to expand his empire till the end of his life. When he died in 1530, he left behind a vast and prosperous empire. It was the biggest in India since the days of Ashoka. The question was, who would succeed him? Well, that would be his son, Humayun. Unfortunately, he wasn't interested in ruling. You see, Humayun was a bit of a flake. He loved parties and women, and he spent most of his time gallivanting around. Honestly, the guy was not cut out to be an emperor. Luckily for him, his mother was. Her name was Mahom Anaga, and she was one of the most powerful women in Mughal history. She held the reins of the empire while her husband was gallivanting around, and she continued to do so even after he died. You see, Humayun's older son was also not interested in ruling, but his youngest son was. The boy was only 13 years old when he took the throne, which meant Mahamanga had to step in as regent yet again. Fortunately for the empire, the boy was a quick learner. He spent his early years touring the provinces, learning the ropes of governance. He met the Rajput chiefs and the Sufi saints. He visited the bustling markets of Gujarat and the magnificent forts of Rajasthan. He returned to Delhi as a changed man. He was no longer the frivolous teenager who was now the greatest emperor in Mughal history. His name was Shah Jahan, and under his rule, India would enter the age of splendor. But that, my friends, is for the next chapter. If you want to watch the next chapter right now, you can do that by clicking here. Otherwise, I'll see you next time. Meanwhile, in Spain and Portugal, merchants and kings asked a bold question. Can we reach India by sea? The desire for spices, textiles, and riches of the East had driven Europeans crazy. But the land routes to Asia were controlled by the Ottoman Empire. So sailors turned to the oceans and began to explore the unknown waters. In this episode of the World's Greatest Explorers series, we will meet the men who discovered new trade routes to the East and proved that the Earth was indeed round. Let's begin. Christopher Columbus. The year is 1492. After decades of planning, a determined Italian explorer set sail from the Spanish port of Palos de la Frontera with 3 ships: the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. His goal is India, which at the time seemed like a distant dream. Columbus believed the Earth was smaller than commonly thought, and with enough determination, one could sail west across the Atlantic Ocean and reach the eastern coast of Asia. However, what he didn't know was that there were vast stretches of land in between. Columbus, son of a wool merchant, was born in Genoa, Italy. In 1451, from an early age he showed great interest in geography and navigation, and by his mid-20s he became a sailor, traveling along the coasts of Western Africa and the Mediterranean. As a young man, he sailed to the island of Madeira, where he encountered Portuguese merchants returning from India, whose ships were filled with exotic spices and valuable goods. This encounter ignited his passion for exploring new trade routes to the east. Columbus became obsessed with reaching Asia because it was known to possess incredible wealth in gold and other precious metals. As well as being the origin of the coveted spice trade, it was said that a single nutmeg could be traded for its weight in gold. Back then, European demand for Asian products was high, but the existing land routes were long, expensive, and dangerous. Running through hostile territories controlled by the Ottoman Empire, a direct sea route would not only cut down travel time and costs, but also reduce European dependence on the Ottomans. Although Columbus did not realize it, he was about to change world history forever. The voyage begins. On August 3, 1492, under the commission of the Spanish monarchs Ferdinand and Isabella, the three ships departed from Palos, carrying a crew of about 90 men. The journey started uneventfully, sailing westward across the endless ocean. For weeks, the sailors faced calm seas and fair weather, but their provisions began to dwindle. Doubts and fear crept into the hearts of the men, whispering that their captain had led them into a watery grave. Tensions grew as the sailors started to panic, wondering if they'd ever see dry land again. Just when hope seemed lost, on October 12th, after 70 days at sea, a landmass appeared on the horizon. It was an island in the Bahamas. Thinking they had reached India or China, the crew named the island San Salvador. But this was just the beginning of their adventure. Landing on the island, Columbus realized he had made a mistake. He was not in India. Though overjoyed to have reached land, the explorer knew he needed to keep going. But his flagship, the Santa Maria, had sprung a leak and grounded on the shallows. Only the Nina and the Pinta could continue the journey. With supplies low and time running out, Columbus ordered the remaining ships to head further west towards mainland Asia. They never found it. The ships returned to Spain empty-handed. The three explorers who braved the unknown waters. Columbus had failed in his quest to reach Asia, but he would die believing he had found the eastern shores of India, which he named the Indies. The real significance of his discovery would not be recognized until years later. Columbus's journey opened up the New World to European exploration and colonization. Ironically, the route to Asia remained elusive for the Spanish. It was the Portuguese who would claim that honor. Vasco da Gama, continuing the legacy of Portugal's Prince Henry the Navigator. Vasco da Gama, a Portuguese explorer, embarked on a daring mission to find a sea route to India. On July 8, 1497, with 4 ships and a crew of about 170 men, da Gama set sail from Lisbon, Portugal. His fleet sailed south along the coast of Africa, battling rough seas and unpredictable currents. As they rounded the Cape of Good Hope, the sailors encountered strange plants, animals, and a landscape unlike anything they had seen before. Continuing on, they followed the coastline of India, until they reached the city of Calicut on September 17, 1498, marking the first time Europe and India had been directly connected by sea. Overjoyed, da Gama realized the potential of this discovery and decided to stay in Calicut. During his stay, he engaged in trade, exchanging European goods such as coral and velvet for Indian products like pepper, cinnamon, and cotton. He also negotiated with local rulers, establishing diplomatic ties between Portugal and India. However, Gama's efforts to secure alliances and trading rights were met with suspicion and hostility from the Zamorin, the ruler of Calicut. The Portuguese presence threatened the established trade networks, and the simmering rivalry between Portugal and Spain added tension to the situation. As Gama prepared to leave, tensions escalated, leading to the Battle of Calicut on February 19, 1499. Despite being outnumbered, the Portuguese, under Gama's leadership, won a decisive victory against the Zamorans' navy, showcasing their superior weaponry and naval tactics. However, the battle left a lasting impact on relations between Portugal and India. Gama successfully established a sea route to India. His aggressive tactics and the competition with other European powers sowed the seeds of conflict that would shape future interactions between Portugal and the region. Ferdinand Magellan. After Vasco da Gama's groundbreaking discovery of a sea route to India, Ferdinand Magellan, a Portuguese explorer, set his sights on an even more ambitious goal, circumnavigating the globe. With the backing of the Spanish crown, Magellan assembled a fleet of 5 ships and over 200 crew members to embark on this perilous journey. In September 1519, the expedition set sail from Seville, Spain. Their ships, the Trinidad, the San Antonio, the Victoria, and the Santiago, braved the treacherous waters of the Atlantic Ocean, guided by the stars and celestial navigation. The journey took them through uncharted territories, facing storms, dwindling supplies, and the threat of scurvy. On November 3, 1519, After crossing the Atlantic, the fleet reached the Strait of Magellan, the narrow passage between the mainland of Chile and Tierra del Fuego, Argentina. 8. This discovery provided an alternative route to the Pacific Ocean, which would become known as the Magellan Strait in his honor. After navigating the treacherous strait, the ships entered the Pacific Ocean. They encountered calm seas and uninhabited islands. However, the tranquility was deceptive as the crew faced numerous hardships, including starvation, dehydration, and death. By February 1520, the fleet had reached the Philippines, where they anchored in the port of Guam on March 6, 1521. Here, Magellan and some of his crew disembarked to explore the island. But during a skirmish with the natives, Magellan was wounded and subsequently killed. Despite their captain's death, the expedition pressed on. On July 8, 1522, the Victoria, under the command of Juan Elcano, reached Spain, having completed the first circumnavigation of the globe. The journey had taken over 3 years, and of the original crew, only 18 had survived. Magellan's expedition had proven once and for all that the Earth was indeed round. It also laid the foundation for global trade routes and expanded European knowledge of geography and navigation. The world was now much smaller, and new possibilities for exploration and trade had opened up. All these explorers changed the course of history. Do you think there are still undiscovered lands? Which parts of the world would you like us to cover next? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an exciting episode. See you soon. This is a history of globalization. The year is 1492. For the people of the 15th century, the world was an increasingly interconnected place. Trade along the major sea routes was becoming more important than ever before. New technologies were making seafaring easier and more accessible than ever before. Voyages of discovery across the Atlantic and around Africa were pushing back the boundaries of the known world. And it all began with one fateful voyage by a man named Christopher Columbus, who sailed west across the Atlantic Ocean in search of a faster route to Asia. What he found instead was the Americas, and thus began the first wave of globalization. From the Americas came potatoes, tomatoes, and maize, which spread to Europe and Asia. From India and Southeast Asia came spices, fabrics, and technologies. From Africa began the dark era of the slave trade, a wound that scarred humanity for centuries. Civilizations, Aztec, Inca, African kingdoms, India, Europe, all came into contact, exchanged goods and ideas, and also clashed. But what exactly does globalization mean? It's the process of countries becoming interconnected through trade, technology, and cultural exchange. And this isn't a modern phenomenon. Globalization has been happening for centuries. The first wave of globalization began with the voyages of discovery and continued until the end of the 18th century. During this time, European powers colonized vast areas of the Americas, Africa, and Asia, and they dominated global trade routes. They exploited the resources and labor of their colonies and shipped the wealth back to Europe. This process had a profound impact on the world. It led to the exchange of goods, ideas, and diseases between continents. For example, the potato, which originated in the Americas, saved millions of Europeans from starvation during the 17th and 18th centuries. At the same time, European colonization led to the enslavement of millions of Africans and the exploitation of indigenous populations in the Americas. The wealth generated through global trade helped to fuel the Industrial Revolution in Europe, which in turn led to the second wave of globalization. This wave began in the 19th century and continued until the end of the 20th century. It was characterized by the growth of multinational corporations, international financial institutions, and global transportation systems. During this time, European powers continued to dominate global affairs. They imposed their economic and political systems on their colonies, which often led to resistance and conflict. For example, the Indian Rebellion of 1857 was a major uprising against British rule. Similarly, the scramble for Africa saw European powers race to colonize the continent. Despite the resistance, the second wave of globalization continued and led to the world we live in today. We live in the era of the third wave of globalization. It began in the late 20th century and continues today. It's characterized by the growth of international organizations, the spread of democratic values, and the increasing interconnectedness of economies. During this time, the power of European nations has declined, and the United States has emerged as the dominant global power. Globalization has led to unprecedented levels of wealth and prosperity in some parts of the world. However, it's also led to inequality and instability in others. Example, the rise of China as an economic power has challenged the existing global order. Similarly, the Arab Spring uprisings were in part a response to globalization and its effects on traditional ways of life. And so we see that globalization is not a new phenomenon. It's been happening for centuries. Each wave has brought with it new challenges and opportunities. As we look to the future, it's clear that globalization will continue to shape our world in profound ways. We must be prepared to meet the challenges and make the most of the opportunities that come our way. Thank you for watching this episode. If you enjoyed it, please like and share it with your friends. You can also subscribe for more updates. We'll see you next time. So, by the late 15th century, let's recap where we are. The Renaissance is happening in Europe, in the Americas. The Aztecs and Inca are building their empires. In Africa, powerful kingdoms like Songhai are rising. And in Asia, China is getting ready for one last hurrah under the Ming dynasty. And then there's India. As we saw in the last episode, the Vijayanagara Empire was busy consolidating power in southern India. In the north, the Senas were making Delhi their own. Meanwhile, in Gujarat, a merchant named Zamorin invited the Portuguese to set up shop in his kingdom. And they did. But the Portuguese presence in India wouldn't last long, because soon the other Europeans would catch wind of the riches of this land and sail in with armies of their own. But before that could happen, India would see the rise of an empire that would define much of its future. And if you want to know how it began, well, that's what's coming up next on our series, all about the magnificent Mughal Empire. Before we get into it, though, now back to the episode. Let's start with a bang. It's the year 1526, and the first battle of Panipat is being fought. Two rival groups face off, the forces of the decaying Delhi Sultanate and those of an upstart warlord named Babur. The battle lasts 2 days, but ends in decisive fashion, when Babur's artillery overpowers the Sultanate's cavalry and infantry, securing him the throne of Delhi. Now, who was this guy, and how did he win such a decisive victory? Babur, born in 1483, wasn't your typical warlord. His paternal side traced its lineage back to Genghis Khan and Timur, the Lame, while his mother's family claimed descent from Babur. But Babur himself was a practicing Muslim. Nevertheless, his Central Asian heritage was key to his military victories. See, the Fergana Valley, where Babur grew up, was a melting pot of cultures and a hub of trade along the Silk Road. This meant that Babur had access to better weapons and gunpowder technology than most of his Indian contemporaries. And he put these technological advantages to good use at the Battle of Panipat. Babur's army included elite shock troops called the Kavasarma, who were armed with long matchlock guns. And when those failed, he had cannons to finish the job. But Babur's story doesn't end here. After consolidating his hold on northern India, he went on to conquer much of central. In eastern India, defeating the Afghan ruler of Kabul and pushing south as far as the Narmada River, and as he expanded his empire, he attracted people from all over Asia to his court, including Muslims from Central Asia and the Middle East, and Hindus from all over India. He even welcomed the recently exiled Portuguese, giving them refuge in his domain. This multiculturalism would become a trademark of Mughal culture. But for now, let's talk more about Babur's empire. While it spanned much of modern-day India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Afghanistan, it wasn't a uniform whole. Instead, it was a patchwork of autonomous states that paid tribute to Babur's authority. In fact, the Mughal emperor wasn't even seen as the supreme leader by many of his subjects. That title belonged to the Sultan of Delhi, and so, to remind everyone who was really in charge, Babur commissioned the construction of grand buildings and monuments across his empire, including his capital at Agra. When Babur died in 1530, he left his son Humayun on the throne. Unfortunately, Humayun was no strategist. In fact, he lost most of the territories his father had conquered. And when he died in 1540, his young son, Akbar, fled to the Rajput kingdom of Amber with his mother. There he was taken in by a Rajput king, who helped raise him as his own child. And this is important because Akbar's relationship with the Rajputs would define the next phase of the Mughal Empire. You see, while Akbar was raised in Rajput society, he never forgot that he was a Mughal, and upon reaching adulthood, he embarked on a campaign to unite northern India once again. Along the way, he made strategic alliances with some Rajput kingdoms, and by 1572, he ruled over much of the subcontinent. He also made sure not to repeat his father's mistakes, cementing his own authority over the local rulers by building new cities and appointing officials to govern them. For example, he built the city of Fatehpur Sikri, which served as his capital from 1571 to 1585, and he established a council called the Ibadat Khana to advise him on matters pertaining to his non-Muslim subjects. His reign wasn't without its problems, though. Despite the efforts of Akbar and his father before him, the Mughal emperors weren't seen as legitimate rulers by many Indians. Most viewed them as foreigners who didn't understand or respect their customs. And it wasn't until Akbar's successor, Jahangir, came to power that things began to change. You see, when Jahangir took the throne in 1605, he married a Rajput princess, thereby further legitimizing the Mughal claim to the Indian subcontinent. He followed in his father's footsteps by continuing to forge alliances with Rajput kingdoms and rebel groups alike. He also appointed one of his Hindu generals, Man Singh, to a prestigious position in his court. And he did all of this while expanding the empire's borders. By the time he died in 1627, the Mughals controlled most of present-day India. Jahangir's son, Shah Jahan, inherited an empire that stretched from the Hindu Kush Mountains to the Deccan Plateau, and he set about expanding it even further. His forces pushed into central India, conquering the Deccan and annexing large parts of the Tamil kingdom of Bijapur. Shah Jahan also consolidated his control over the existing provinces, building new roads and canals and strengthening the defenses of his major cities. But perhaps Shah Jahan is best remembered for his architectural legacy. In the early 1630s, commenced the construction of a new capital at Shah Jahanabad, today known as Old Delhi. Then in 1632, started work on what would become his magnum opus, the Taj Mahal, in memory of his beloved wife, Mumtaz Mahal. But Shah Jahan's reign wasn't all sunshine and roses. Remember those Deccan rulers he had annexed? Well, they weren't just going to accept their loss so easily. Soon after, Shah Jahan ascended the throne, a group of Deccan sultans rose in rebellion, forcing him to divert resources away from building projects and towards the military. And although the rebellions were eventually put down, the damage was done. Shah Jahan's successors would spend much of the next century trying to undo the territorial losses of his reign. The last great Mughal emperor we'll cover in this series is Aurangzeb, who took the throne in 1658. Like his predecessors, Aurangzeb expanded his empire through conquest, bringing most of the Indian subcontinent under Mughal rule. He also made efforts to bring the Hindu and Muslim halves of his empire closer together. To that end, he levied new taxes on non-Muslims, earning him the enmity of many of his Rajput allies. And in 1665, they rebelled against his rule. Over the next decade, Aurangzeb spent most of his resources putting down the rebellion, weakening the empire. And when he died in 1707, the seeds of decline had already been sown. Nevertheless, the Mughal Empire would endure for another century, even as its power waned. And in the meantime, we have more world history to cover. The Europeans had arrived in India, eager to carve out a piece of the subcontinent for themselves. But first, they would have to deal with each other, which brings us to the age of exploration and the race for empire. If you want to learn how European powers carved 3 continents between them, then you're going to love our course, the European Overseas Empires. And it's free for the first 200 of you. Just click the link in the description below to grab your spot. Thanks for watching. This is India. This is a story of India, and this is how India became a superpower. Once upon a time, somewhere in Central Asia, there lived a warrior king named Timur. He had a son named Babur. Babur's father died when he was very young, and life was tough for the family. But Timur's ambition was to conquer India. And so Babur grew up dreaming about India, the land of spices and wealth. One day Babur got an offer that changed everything. The ruler of Delhi needed an army to win a battle, and Babur, who had his own army of 20,000 men, was just the man for the job. So off he went to India with his men. When he reached India, he defeated the ruler of Delhi and laid siege to the city. But instead of looting the place and putting the people through misery, he offered them a deal. If they surrendered, their lives and property would be spared. The surprised ruler of Delhi accepted the deal and gave him half of his treasure. With this newfound wealth, Babur continued to expand his kingdom and established the Mughal Empire in 1526, but this was just the beginning. His grandson, Akbar the Great, took the empire to great heights between 1542 and 1605. Not only did he expand the empire to cover almost the whole subcontinent, but he was also a pioneer of religious reforms and secularism. His mother was a Hindu, but he was raised in the Muslim faith. And throughout his reign, he was keen to learn more about other religions too. Once while hunting, his men spotted a sadhu meditating under a tree. The sadhu didn't budge even when asked to move so that the emperor could shoot the animal. Impressed by the sadhu's dedication to his spiritual practice, Akbar invited him to court, where the two engaged in deep discussions about Dharma. The emperor was so fascinated by what he learned that he asked the sadhu to become his spiritual guide. Over time, Akbar realized that the sadhu's teachings were actually closer to those of Hinduism, and he began looking into the ancient scriptures of Sanatana Dharma. This led him to realize that the concepts of karma, rebirth, and moksha, or liberation, resonated deeply within him. So much so that he started following these Hindu philosophies in his daily life. In fact, he abolished the jizya tax, which was a tax that non-Muslims had to pay to the Muslim rulers. He replaced it with a land revenue system that was much more beneficial to the common people. His policy advisor, Abul Fazl, wrote about the emperor's views on religion. He said all the different religions are like different paths leading to the same goal, just as the branches of a tree may be numerous, but all of them spring from the same trunk. So all the religions may have different practices, but their ultimate aim is one and the same. Such was the religious tolerance of Emperor Akbar. He was also known for his grand feasts, inviting people from all walks of life to join him. During one such feast, he invited 8 accomplished scholars from different religions to debate about God and spirituality. The topics ranged from the nature of reality to the purpose of human existence. Each scholar brought their unique perspective based on their faith, and yet there was mutual respect among them all. This gathering of brilliant minds from various religions became a regular occurrence in the royal court, fostering an atmosphere of intellectual exchange and tolerance. Akbar also introduced a new system of weights and measures, founded an academy of arts, and promoted the welfare of his subjects. He believed in the concept of Sulh-e-Kul, which meant universal peace, band. And he genuinely wished to establish it, even reaching out to the Portuguese, the British, and the Dutch to propose alliances against the Ottomans. But unfortunately, these alliances never materialized. Still, Akbar's vision of universal peace remains relevant even today. But when it comes to lavishness, no Mughal emperor can beat Shah Jahan. He ruled from 1628 to 1658, and during this time, the empire's capital was at Agra, which was undoubtedly one of the most beautiful cities in the world. It was home to many architectural marvels, but none as mesmerizing as the Taj Mahal, which still stands as India's pride and joy. Shah Jahan had been smitten with Mumtaz, a beautiful Persian princess, who was the daughter of a powerful noble. The two fell head over heels in love and soon tied the knot. But alas, she passed away, giving birth to their 14th child. Grief-stricken, the emperor decided to build a magnificent tomb for her, something that would stand as a testament to their eternal love. He chose a spot on the banks of the Yamuna River and set to work. The construction of the Taj began in 1632 and took 22 years to complete. It was built with white marble, and precious stones like jade and lapis lazuli were inlaid on its surface. The design was a masterpiece, a perfect blend of Islamic, Persian, and Indian architectural styles. To make sure the best materials were used, Shah Jahan sent his men all over the country to gather the finest marble and other building supplies. And they weren't afraid to go to great lengths to get what they wanted. For example, when they discovered a white marble quarry in a remote jungle in a place called Mogadishu, they built a road all the way from Agra to make transportation easier. It wasn't just the architecture that made the Taj so special. Shah Jahan wanted to create a beautiful garden around it as well. So he commissioned the construction of 4 Sharbagh gardens, each divided into 12 sections with fountains and canals to water the flowers and trees. These gardens were designed to represent paradise, as described in the Quran. They were full of fragrant blossoms, lush greenery, and sparkling water features that created a peaceful atmosphere for visitors to relax in. But what truly set the Taj apart was the calligraphy adorning its walls. Verses from the Quran were inscribed in elegant Arabic script, reminding visitors of the power of love and the inevitability of death. One of the most famous inscriptions reads, "He who conquers time is stronger than time." Shah Jahan poured his heart and soul into creating this monument of love. He spared no expense and made sure every detail was perfect. He even assembled a team of astronomers to help him choose the perfect location for the tomb. When it was finally completed, the Taj Mahal was a sight to behold. Its towering dome and minarets seemed to touch the sky, while its white marble gleamed like a beacon in the sunlight. People from all over the world came to Agra to witness this architectural marvel and pay their respects to Mumtaz. But despite all the beauty, there was a dark side to the Taj. Thousands of laborers and artisans worked tirelessly to complete the project. Many of them were injured or died. In fact, some historians believe that Shah Jahan intentionally starved his subjects to death to fund the construction of the Taj. Either way, the emperor's obsession with the project drained the treasury and left the once prosperous empire in ruins. Nonetheless, the Taj remained a symbol of eternal love until Shah Jahan's son Aurangzeb came to power. He was much of a fan of his father's extravagance, and he hated the expense that went into maintaining the gardens around the Taj, so he ordered them to be destroyed. But that didn't stop the Taj from remaining one of the 7 wonders of the world. Today, millions of people visit the Taj Mahal every year to admire its beauty. They come from all over the world to see the poem in stone. Every evening as the sun sets, the marble glows in the fading light and seems to touch the sky. The sight is truly mesmerizing and leaves visitors speechless. What makes the Taj even more romantic is the story behind its construction. Visitors can't help but fall in love with the tale of devotion and sacrifice. Some say that Shah Jahan was so moved by the beauty of the Taj, when it was finished, that he ordered its gates to be locked so that no one else could see it. This adds to the mystery and allure of the monument and makes it even more desirable to see. It might seem hard to believe, but there are people who claim to have seen the Taj Mahal glowing by moonlight. They say the marble shimmers and shines like 1,000 stars, creating a magical atmosphere that's hard to forget. It's said that the best time to witness this phenomenon is on a full moon night when the moon is at its brightest. As the moonlight bathes the Taj in its silvery glow, it looks like a dream come true. Imagine standing in front of the Taj Mahal at night, surrounded by the darkness of the sky and the quiet murmur of the Yamuna River flowing nearby. As the moon climbs higher in the sky, its soft light reflects off the white marble, creating a sight that's both eerie and beautiful. The intricate details of the architecture are highlighted in the moonlight, making it look like a fantasy straight out of a storybook. The air is filled with a sense of tranquility and peace, broken only by the sound of the gentle breeze rustling through the trees. The Taj appears to float above the ground as if it's suspended in time and space. It's a moment that's both humbling and inspiring. Though we don't know exactly how the Taj Mahal looked when it was first built, we can imagine that the moonlight would have cast an ethereal glow on its pristine white marble, making it seem like a beacon of hope in the darkness. In fact, it's said that Shah Jahan envisioned the Taj Mahal as a symbol of enlightenment, a place where the darkness of ignorance could be dispelled by the light of knowledge. And what better way to symbolize that than with the glow of the moon? Sadly, today the moon isn't allowed to illuminate the Taj at night. The Archaeological Survey of India hasn't permitted nighttime tourism at the site due to security concerns. However, the government has promised to reconsider this decision in the near future. So hopefully one day we'll all be able to experience the magic of seeing the Taj Mahal glowing in the moonlight. This is incredible India. So don't forget to subscribe for more stories.